The wind was howling like a wild animal that October night in 1867. Samuel Morrison sat by his small fireplace, listening to the storm tear across the Texas plains. His log cabin creaked and groaned with each gust, and rain hammered against the single window like angry fists. He'd been living alone on this piece of land for 3 long years now, and storms like this still made him nervous. Samuel was a simple man who'd come west after the war ended. He wasn't looking for gold or glory, just a quiet place to start over. His nearest neighbor lived 15 miles away, and the closest town was a full day's ride through rough country. On nights like this, the loneliness felt heavy as a wet blanket. He stirred the beans cooking over his fire and tried not to think about how the wind sounded like voices calling out in the darkness. Living alone on the frontier meant your mind could play tricks on you. Every settler knew stories about folks who'd gone a little crazy from too much silence and too many empty horizons. But then he heard something that wasn't the wind. Thump. 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 Someone was pounding on his door. Samuel froze with his spoon halfway to his mouth. Nobody traveled in weather like this. Nobody should be out there at all. His rifle hung on pegs above the fireplace, and he looked at it now, calculating how fast he could reach it if needed. The pounding came again, weaker this time. Then he heard something that made his blood run cold. A voice barely audible over the storm, calling out words he couldn't understand. Samuel grabbed his rifle and moved to the window. He couldn't see anything in the darkness except sheets of rain. Lightning flashed, and for just a moment he glimpsed a small figure hunched against his door. The smart thing would be to wait it out. Out here, strangers in the night usually meant trouble. But something about that voice, it sounded young, desperate, maybe hurt. Samuel had fought in the war. He'd seen men die and had killed a few himself when he had to. But he'd also learned something about fear and desperation. Sometimes people needed help, and sometimes you were the only one who could give it. He unlocked the heavy wooden bar across his door and opened it just a crack, keeping his rifle ready. What he saw made him forget all about being careful. A young girl collapsed forward into his cabin. She couldn't have been more than 16 with long black hair plastered to her head by the rain. Her clothes were torn and muddy, and she was shaking so hard she could barely stand. But it wasn't just the cold making her shake. Samuel could see she was scared, really scared, and she was Comanche. Samuel knew enough about the local tribes to recognize the style of her clothing and the way she wore her hair. The Comanche had been fighting settlers in this area for years. Most folks around here would shoot first and ask questions later if they found one on their property. But this wasn't a warrior. This was just a kid who looked half dead from cold and exhaustion. The girl looked up at him with dark eyes full of fear and hope. She said something in her own language, then tried English. "Please," she whispered. "Help." Samuel stood there for a moment, rain blowing into his cabin, knowing this was one of those decisions that could change everything. He could turn her away, send her back into the storm. It would be safer. Smarter, maybe. Instead, he stepped aside and let her in. "Come on," he said, setting his rifle aside. "Get away from that door before we both freeze." The girl stumbled to his fireplace and sank down beside it, still shaking. Samuel could see she had a nasty cut on her left arm, and her feet were bleeding through worn-out moccasins. She'd been traveling hard and fast through rough country. Samuel got some old blankets from his trunk and wrapped them around her shoulders. She flinched when he came close, but she was too cold and tired to run. "What's your name?" he asked gently. She looked at him for a long moment, probably trying to decide if she could trust him. Finally, she spoke. "Ayanna." Her English was broken but understandable. Samuel had heard that some Comanche learned English from traders or captives, though he'd never expected to have a conversation with one in his own cabin. "Ayanna," he repeated. "That's a pretty name. I'm Samuel. Are you hungry?" She nodded, and he ladled some beans into a bowl for her. She ate like she hadn't seen food in days, which she probably hadn't. While she ate, Samuel heated water to clean. The cut on her arm. "How did you get hurt?" he asked as he gently washed the wound. Ayanna winced but held still. "Horsefall," she said. "In river. Storm come fast." Samuel could picture it. Caught in the open when the weather turned bad, horse spooked and threw her, probably lost everything she'd been carrying. She was lucky to be alive. As he bandaged her arm with clean cloth, Ayanna started talking. Her English got better as she relaxed, like she was remembering words she hadn't used in a while. She told him she'd been traveling for 2 days, trying to get away from her people. Her father was a war chief. She used a Comanche word Samuel didn't know, but the way she said it made clear he was someone important. He'd arranged for her to marry a warrior she didn't want, someone cruel who already had 2 wives. "I cannot," she said, her eyes filling with tears. "He hurt other wives. Father not listen. Say it bring peace between bands." Samuel understood. He'd heard about such arrangements among the tribes, marriages to create alliances or end conflicts. The girl's feelings didn't matter much in those deals. "So you ran away," he said. She nodded. "But they follow. Always follow." Samuel felt a chill that had nothing to do with the storm. If Comanche warriors were tracking her, they'd follow the trail right to his door. Finding their chief's daughter in a white man's cabin would look like kidnapping at best, an act of war at worst. But looking at Ayanna, still wrapped in his blankets and trying to get warm, Samuel couldn't bring himself to care about the danger. She was just a scared kid who'd run away from a bad situation. He'd been scared himself once, running from things he couldn't control. "You can stay here tonight," he told her. "Storm should pass by morning." Relief flooded her face. "Thank you," she whispered. Samuel made up a bed for her in the corner furthest from the door, giving her what privacy he could in the small cabin. She curled up under the blankets and was asleep in minutes, exhausted by her ordeal. But Samuel couldn't sleep. He sat by the dying fire, his rifle across his knees, listening to the storm and thinking about what tomorrow might bring. He'd made his choice to help her, but choices had consequences out here. Big ones. Outside, the wind was starting to die down. By morning, the storm would be over, and anyone tracking Ayanna would be able to follow her trail again. Samuel had, maybe 6 or 8 hours before he found out whether his act of kindness would cost him everything. He looked over at the sleeping girl and hoped he'd made the right choice. But even if he hadn't, he knew he'd make the same decision again. Some things were more important than being safe. Samuel woke up before sunrise, like he always did. The cabin was quiet except for the soft breathing coming from the corner where Ayanna slept. The storm had passed during the night, leaving behind that strange stillness that always followed. Bad weather on the plains. He moved carefully, trying not to wake her. The poor girl had been through enough, and she needed rest. Samuel stepped outside to check on his animals and see what damage the storm might have done to his small homestead. The morning air was crisp and clean, washed by all that rain. His 2 horses were fine in their shelter, and the chickens were, already pecking around in the mud looking for worms. Everything seemed normal, but Samuel couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed. Maybe it was just knowing he wasn't alone in his cabin for the first time in months. When he came back inside, Ayanna was awake, sitting up in her blankets and looking around nervously. The daylight streaming through his window made her look even younger than she had the night before. Her long black hair was tangled and there were dark circles under her eyes. "Morning," Samuel said quietly. "How's that arm feeling?" She flexed her bandaged arm carefully. "Better, thank you." Samuel started making coffee and heating up some leftover cornbread. "You hungry?" She nodded, but he could see she was worried. About something. Her eyes kept darting to the door like she expected someone to come bursting through at any moment. As they ate breakfast together, Ayanna started talking more freely. Her English was getting better as she remembered more words, and Samuel realized she was probably smarter than most folks would give her credit for. "My father," she said suddenly, staring into her coffee cup. "He is Iron Bear." Samuel nearly choked on his coffee. Even he had heard that name. Iron Bear was one of the most feared Comanche war chiefs in all of Texas. The man had been fighting settlers and soldiers for 20 years, and his name was spoken in whispers around campfires from here to Mexico. "Iron Bear is your father?" Samuel asked, trying to keep his voice steady. Ayanna nodded, and Samuel could see she understood exactly what that meant. He very, how you say, strong leader. Many warriors follow him. He make peace sometimes, make war sometimes. People listen when he speak. Samuel set down his coffee cup with hands that weren't quite steady. This changed everything. He wasn't just harboring some runaway girl. He was hiding the daughter of one of the most powerful men in the territory. If Iron Bear thought Samuel had kidnapped his daughter, there wouldn't be enough left of this homestead to fill a coffee cup. He loved me, Ayanna continued, but he loved his people more. Marriage to Stonewolf, bring his band together with another band. Make them stronger, for fighting soldiers. Stonewolf? Samuel asked. Her face darkened. The man father choose for me. He already have 2 wives. Beat them when he angry. Kill his first wife's baby when it cry too much. She shuddered. I see him hurt people. Hurt animals for fun. Father, not believe me when I tell him. Samuel felt sick. He'd heard stories about men like that, red and white alike. Power without conscience was a dangerous thing, no matter what color skin it came wrapped in. So you decided to run. I try speak to father many times. Tell him Stonewolf bad man. But father say marriage already decided. Say I must do duty to tribe. Tears started running down her cheeks. I cannot marry man who kill babies. Cannot. Samuel handed her a clean rag to wipe her eyes. He was starting to understand why she'd risked everything to get away. Some things were worse than death, and living with a monster was probably one of them. How long before they start looking for you? He asked. Already looking, Ayanna said, quietly. Father sends scouts when sunrise after I disappear. They very good at tracking. Follow trail even after rain. Samuel's blood turned to ice water. Even after last night's storm? She nodded. Comanche can track mouse across stone. Rain make harder, but not impossible. They find where I cross river, find where horse fall. Follow trail here. Samuel stood up and walked to his window, looking out at the peaceful morning. Somewhere out there, warriors were following a trail that led straight to his front door. He might have hours or he might have minutes. Why didn't you tell me this last night? He asked. Ayanna looked down at her hands. You help me when I need help. If I tell you who father is, maybe you not help. Maybe send me back to Storm. Samuel turned around to look at her. She was right, and they both knew it. If she'd told him she was Iron Bear's daughter right off, he probably would have thought twice about letting her in. Fear made people do things they weren't proud of. What happens when they find you here? He asked. Depend on father mood, Ayanna said. If he think you steal me, he kill you slow. If he think you help me willing, maybe kill you quick. And if he thinks I was just trying to help? She was quiet for a long moment. Father is not cruel man, but he is war chief. Cannot show weakness. Other warriors watch what he do. If he let white man keep his daughter even for one night, maybe they think he getting soft. Samuel sat back down across from her. So no matter what, this probably doesn't end well for me. I sorry, she whispered. I very sorry. I not think. I just scared and cold and hurt. You only person show kindness. Looking at her sitting there, still wrapped in his blankets and trying not to cry, Samuel realized something. He wasn't sorry he'd helped her. Even knowing what was coming. Even knowing it might cost him everything, he wasn't sorry. Don't apologize, he said. You did what you had to do, I did what I had to do. Sometimes that's all any of us can manage. They sat in silence for a while, both thinking about what came next. Samuel could send her away now. Tell her to keep running. But where would she go? She had no horse, no supplies, and winter was coming. She'd probably die alone out there on the plains. He could try to hide her, but that was just delaying the inevitable. Comanche trackers would find signs of her presence no matter how careful he was. Or he could stay and face whatever came. Maybe. Try to explain. Try to make Iron Bear understand that he'd only been trying to help. Tell me about your father, Samuel said finally. What kind of man is he really? Ayanna thought about it. He fair with his people, listen to counsel, but white. Man kill his brother 2 summers ago. Kill his first son in battle year before that. He not trust white men now. That wasn't encouraging news. Samuel had heard about the recent fighting between the army and various tribes. Good men on both sides had died, and that kind of pain made people hard. Does he speak English? Samuel asked. Little bit. Enough. Samuel nodded. If it came to talking, at least they could understand each other. That was something anyway. Outside, his rooster crowed and the morning was getting brighter. Samuel knew he had decisions to make and not much time to make them. He could saddle his horse and ride for town, leaving Ayanna to face her father, alone. He could try to hide her somewhere and hope for the best. Or he could stay and try to convince a grieving war chief that he'd meant no harm. Looking at Ayanna, still scared but trying to be brave, Samuel knew there was really only one choice he could live with. He just hoped he'd live long enough to find out if it was the right one. Samuel was checking his horses when he saw the first one. It was just after sunrise on the second day, and the morning mist was still rising from the wet grass. He'd stepped outside to give his animals some hay when something caught his eye on the ridge to the north. A dark shape that didn't belong there sitting perfectly still against the pale sky. At first he thought it might be a tree or a rock he'd somehow never noticed before. But then it moved, just slightly, and Samuel's heart started beating faster. He squinted, trying to make out details in the early light. It was a man on horseback, sitting motionless about 300 yards away. Even from that distance, Samuel could tell he was watching the cabin. Samuel forced himself to move slowly, casually, like he hadn't noticed anything unusual. He finished feeding the horses and walked back toward his cabin, but his skin was crawling like someone was aiming a rifle at his back. He was almost to his door when he saw the second one. This rider was positioned to the east, on another low hill. Same distance, same stillness. Samuel's mouth went dry as he realized what was happening. Inside the cabin, Ayanna was sitting by the window, but she wasn't looking out. She was staring at her hands, lost in thought. Samuel moved to the window carefully, staying to one side so he wouldn't be easily seen. "Don't look up," he said quietly. "But we've got company." Ayanna went rigid. "How many?" "Two that I can see. Probably more." She closed her eyes for a moment and Samuel could see her lips moving in what might have been a prayer. When she opened them again, there was a sadness there that made her look older than her years. "They here," she whispered. Samuel scanned the horizon more carefully now and his blood turned to ice. There were more riders positioned like points on a compass around his homestead. To the south, two more. To the west, another pair. They were too far away to make out faces, but close enough that he could see they were all armed. And they were all perfectly still, just watching. "How many warriors does your father usually travel with?" Samuel asked, trying to keep his voice steady. "For hunting, maybe 10 or 12. For war." She swallowed hard. "Many more." Samuel continued his slow scan of the hills and ridges around his property. The more he looked, the more he found. They were everywhere, positioned so that no one could leave his land without being seen. It was like being in the center of a giant circle, and that circle was made of armed men who probably wanted him dead. He started counting. 10, 15, 20. The numbers kept climbing as he spotted more riders in the distance. Some were hidden behind rocks or trees, but the morning sun was hitting them just right, and Samuel could make out their silhouettes. "Jesus," he breathed. "There must be 40 of them out there." "More," Ayanna said softly. "You not see them all. Father, very careful. Some hide where you cannot see." Samuel's legs felt weak. He'd been in battles during the war, but this was different. In the war, you had other soldiers with you, officers making plans, some hope of fighting your way out. Here he was alone with a scared girl, surrounded by the best fighters on the plains. "Why aren't they attacking?" he asked. Ayanna was quiet for a moment, thinking. "Father want to see what you do. Want to understand why you have his daughter. If you try to run, they kill you. If you try to fight, they kill you. If you hurt me, they kill you very slow. And if I just sit here? Then maybe we talk first." Samuel wasn't sure if that was better or worse. At least if they just attacked, it would be over quick. This waiting, this being watched by dozens of eyes was almost worse than fighting. He moved away from the window and sat down at his small table. His hands were shaking, and he clasped them together to make it stop. He'd been scared before, but this was different. This was the kind of fear that made your bones feel like water. "I'm sorry," Ayanna said suddenly. "This all my fault. You helped me, and now they're going to kill you for it." Samuel looked at her. She was crying again, but trying to hide it. Just a kid, really, caught between her father's expectations and her own conscience. None of this was her fault. "No," he said firmly. "You were in trouble, and I helped. That's what people are supposed to do for each other. I'm not sorry about that. But you die because of me. Maybe. Or maybe we figure something out." Samuel wasn't sure he believed that, but he had to try. "Tell me about your father. What's he like when he's not being a war chief?" Ayanna wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. He good father when I small. Tell stories. Teach me to ride horse. But after soldiers kill my brother, he change. Get angry all time. Say white men cannot be trusted." Samuel nodded. He'd seen what war could do to men, how it could eat away at the soft parts of them until only the hard edges were left. Maybe. Iron Bear had been different once before he'd lost so much. The morning dragged on, and the watchers never moved. Samuel tried to go about his normal routine, but it was impossible to forget about all those eyes on him. Every time he looked out the window, there they were, patient as death itself. Around midday, he saw something that made his heart stop completely. A new rider was approaching from the north, but this one wasn't trying to hide. He rode straight, toward the cabin, tall and proud, his horse stepping carefully through the wet grass. Even from a distance, Samuel could tell this man was different from the others. The way he sat his horse, the way the other warriors seemed to watch him. This had to be Iron Bear himself. The war chief was a big man, broad-shouldered and scarred, with long hair that hung past his shoulders. He wore traditional clothing, but Samuel could see a rifle across his saddle and what looked like a pistol at his belt. This was a man who'd learned to fight in the old way and the new way both. Iron Bear stopped about 50 yards from the cabin, well within rifle range but far enough away that Samuel couldn't see his eyes clearly. He sat there for what felt like hours but was probably only minutes, just looking at the cabin where his daughter was hiding. Then he did something that surprised Samuel. He raised one hand, palm out, in what looked like a greeting or maybe a signal, not threatening, just acknowledging that he was there. Samuel didn't know what to do. Should he wave back? Should he come outside? Should he pretend he hadn't seen? Before he could decide, Iron Bear turned his horse and rode back to join the other watchers. But he didn't go far. Samuel could see him on the ridge to the north, close enough that he could ride down in seconds if he wanted to. "He's waiting for something," Samuel said. Ayanna nodded. "Father, patient man. He wait for you to make first move. Then he decide what to do." Samuel realized this was like a deadly game of chess, and he was playing against a master. Every move he made would be watched, judged, and could determine whether he lived or died. The problem was, he didn't know the rules. All he knew was that somewhere out there, Iron Bear was watching his cabin and thinking about what to do with the white man who'd spent the night alone with his daughter. And Samuel had the terrible feeling that no matter what he did next, it was probably going to be the wrong thing. The sun was getting higher and the day was getting hotter, but Samuel felt cold all the way through. He'd never felt so alone in his life, even with Ayanna sitting right there beside him. Outside, 70 of the best warriors on the plains were waiting to see what he'd do next, and Samuel had absolutely no idea what that should be. The waiting was killing him. Samuel had been in his cabin for 3 hours now, watching the watchers watch him back. The sun was getting high and hot, but he didn't dare step outside for more than a few seconds at a time. Every time he showed himself, he could feel dozens of eyes tracking his every movement. His coffee had gone cold hours ago. His hands wouldn't stay steady enough to drink it anyway. Ayanna sat in the corner, quiet as a mouse, but he could see the fear in her eyes. getting worse by the minute. "This is torture," Samuel muttered, pacing from the window to the door and back again. "Why don't they just get it over with?" "Father testing you," Ayanna said softly. "Want to see if you panic, if you run, if you try to hurt me." "And what happens if I do any of those things?" She didn't answer, but the look on her face told him everything he needed to know. Samuel had fought in enough battles to know that waiting was often the hardest part. Your mind started playing tricks on you. You imagined things that weren't there, heard sounds that didn't exist. But this was different. The danger was real, and it was sitting right outside his door. He tried to think of a plan, but what could he do? He had one rifle, maybe 20 rounds of ammunition, and a scared girl who couldn't help him fight even if he wanted her to. Outside, there were 70 warriors who'd been training for war since they could walk. The math wasn't encouraging. Around noon, when the sun was directly overhead and the heat was making everything shimmer, Iron Bear finally made his move. Samuel was at the window when he saw the war chief riding down from the ridge. This time he wasn't stopping at a distance. He was coming all the way to the cabin, his horse stepping carefully through Samuel's vegetable garden. "He's coming," Samuel said, his voice barely above a whisper. Ayanna shot to her feet and moved to the window. When she saw her father approaching, she made a sound that was half sob, half sigh. "Father." Iron Bear was even more imposing up close. He was tall and broad, with scars on his face and arms that told stories of old battles. His hair was streaked with gray, and his eyes were the coldest thing Samuel had ever seen. This was a man who'd killed enemies with his bare hands and slept soundly afterward. The war chief stopped his horse just outside Samuel's door, close enough that they could talk without shouting, but far enough that Samuel couldn't reach him with a knife or hatchet. Smart man. For a long moment, neither of them moved. Iron Bear sat on his horse like a statue, studying the cabin. Samuel stood frozen by his window, not sure whether he should hide or show himself. Then Iron Bear spoke, and his voice was like thunder rolling across the plains. "White man," he called out in clear English. "Come outside. We talk." Samuel's heart was pounding so hard he thought it might burst. This was it, the moment that would decide whether he lived or died. He looked at Ayanna, who was pressed against the wall beside the window, tears streaming down her face. "What do I do?" he whispered. "Go," she said. "Father want to see your face when you talk. Want to see if you lie." Samuel picked up his rifle, then put it down again. Going out armed would just make things worse. If Iron Bear wanted him dead, a rifle wouldn't save him anyway. He walked to the door on legs that felt like they were made of wood. His hand shook as he lifted the latch. The door swung open, and suddenly he was face to face with one of the most feared men in Texas. Iron Bear looked even bigger up close. His horse was a magnificent black stallion that stood perfectly still, trained for war. The war chief himself was dressed in traditional clothing decorated with beadwork and feathers, but Samuel noticed he wore a gun belt with a Colt revolver. Old ways and new ways, just like Ayanna had said. "You are Samuel," Iron Bear said. It wasn't a question. "Yes, sir," Samuel managed to say. His voice sounded thin and weak compared to the war chief's. "You have my daughter." Samuel nodded, not trusting himself to speak. Iron Bear's eyes were like chips of black ice. "You take her from her people, from her father. This is crime among Comanche. Punishment is death." Samuel's throat felt like it was full of sand. "I didn't take her, sir. She came to me. During the storm. She was hurt and scared." "You lie." "No, sir, I'm not lying. She knocked on my door in the middle of the night. She was bleeding and half frozen. I just tried to help." Iron Bear stared at him for what felt like forever. Samuel could hear his own heartbeat in his ears, and somewhere in the distance, a hawk was crying. The war chief's horse shifted its weight, and the leather of his saddle creaked. "You help enemy of your people," Iron Bear said finally. "I helped a person who needed help," Samuel replied, surprising himself with how steady his voice sounded. "That's what folks are supposed to do for each other. Comanche kill many white men. White men kill many Comanche. You know this. Samuel nodded. Yes, sir, I know. I've heard the stories. Then why you help Comanche, girl? That was the question Samuel had been asking himself since the moment he opened his door. Why had he risked everything for a stranger? Why had he thrown away his safety for a girl whose people were at war with his own? Because she was scared and hurt, he said simply. Because she needed help, and I was the only one there to give it. Iron Bear studied his face like he was trying to read his thoughts. Samuel forced himself to meet the war chief's gaze, even though every instinct told him to look away. You could have turned her away, Iron Bear said. Yes, sir, I could have. You could have used her, hurt her, sell her to soldiers. Samuel felt sick at the thought. I would never do that to anyone. Why not? She is enemy, daughter of man who kill your people. Samuel thought about that. Why hadn't he turned her away? Why hadn't he at least considered using her as some kind of bargaining chip? Because she's not my enemy, he said finally. She's just a girl who was running from something that scared her worse than dying. I've been scared like that before. I know what it feels like. Something flickered in Iron Bear's eyes. Not softness exactly, but maybe understanding. You know fear, the war chief said. Yes, sir. I was in the war. I know what it's like to be afraid and have nowhere to run. Iron Bear nodded slowly. War make men hard. Make them forget mercy. Sometimes, Samuel agreed. But sometimes it teaches you that mercy is the only thing that makes us different from animals. Behind him, Samuel could hear Ayanna moving around, inside the cabin. He wondered if she was listening, if she was as scared as he was. Your war was for what? Iron Bear asked. I thought it was for freedom, Samuel said, but mostly it was just for survival. My war is for survival too, survival of my people. Samuel nodded. He could understand that. Every man had something he'd fight for, something he'd die to protect. Your daughter, Samuel said carefully, she's part of your people's survival. Iron Bear's face hardened. She is my daughter. Her marriage bring peace between bands, make us stronger. But she's afraid of the man you chose for her. Stone Wolf is strong warrior, good provider. She says he's cruel, says he hurt his other wives. Iron Bear's eyes flashed with anger, but Samuel couldn't tell if it was directed at him or at the situation. Ayanna is young. She not understand duty to tribe. She understands plenty, Samuel said, his own anger starting to rise. She understands that you're asking her to marry a man who kills babies when they cry too much. The war chief went very still. His hand moved toward his gun, and Samuel realized he might have just signed his own death warrant. But he couldn't take it back now. And maybe it needed to be said. The silence stretched between them like a rope about to snap. Iron Bear's hand had moved to his gun when Samuel mentioned Stone Wolf killing babies. For a heartbeat, Samuel thought the war chief might draw on him right there. But Iron Bear was too smart for that. Instead, he sat perfectly still on his horse, those cold black eyes boring into Samuel's soul. You speak of things you not understand, Iron Bear said finally, his voice low and dangerous. Maybe, Samuel replied, trying to keep his voice steady. But I understand right from wrong, and I understand what your daughter told me. Ayanna is child. She see world as child see it. She's old enough to know cruelty when she sees it. Iron Bear's jaw tightened, but before he could respond, the cabin door opened behind Samuel. Ayanna stepped out, and Samuel's heart nearly stopped. This wasn't part of any plan they'd talked about. Father, she said in English so Samuel could understand, please not hurt this man. Iron Bear's expression changed when he saw his daughter. The hardness was still there, but Samuel caught a glimpse of something else. Pain, maybe, or loss. This was a father looking at his child, not just a war chief making a political decision. Ayanna walked slowly toward her father's horse, her hands visible and empty. She was trying to show she wasn't a threat, but Samuel could see she was terrified. I come willingly, she said. You not need to hurt Samuel. He do nothing wrong. He keep you from your duty. Iron Bear said, but his voice was softer now. No, Father, I run from duty myself. He just give me shelter from storm. Samuel watched the exchange, feeling like he was seeing something private that he shouldn't witness. This was a family trying to work out their problems, and he was caught in the middle of it. Ayana stopped about 10 feet from her father's horse. Father, I need tell you about Stone Wolf. Iron Bear's face went hard again. Stone Wolf is strong warrior, marriage already decided. Stone Wolf kill Redbird's baby, Ayana said quietly. The war chief went very still. That is serious accusation. I see it, Father. Baby cry during ceremony. Stone Wolf get angry, say baby show weakness. He take baby from Redbird and... She couldn't finish the sentence, but she didn't need to. Samuel watched Iron Bear's face and saw something crack in that stony exterior. The war chief knew his daughter wouldn't lie about something like this. Not to him. Not about something so important. Why you not tell me before? Iron Bear asked. I try, Father. Many times. But, you say marriage bring peace. Say I must think of tribe first. If Stone Wolf do this thing, he did, Father, and he hurt his wives when no one watching. Make them afraid to speak. I cannot marry such man, cannot. Samuel could see Iron Bear struggling with himself. As a father, he was horrified by what his daughter was telling him. But as a leader, he had to think about the bigger picture, about the alliance this marriage was supposed to create. Finally, Iron Bear looked at Samuel. You believe my daughter speak truth? Samuel nodded. Yes, sir. She told me the same thing last night. She was crying when she said it. And you help her because you believe her? I helped her because she needed help, Samuel said. But yes, I believe her. No woman should have to marry a man who would hurt children. Iron Bear was quiet for a long time, thinking. Samuel could hear birds singing in the distance, and somewhere a cow was lowing. Normal sounds from a normal day, except nothing about this day was normal. Ayana, Iron Bear said finally. Come here. She walked closer to his horse, close enough that he could reach down and touch her if he wanted to. Father and daughter looked at each other, and Samuel could see 20 years of love and conflict passing between them. You run away from me, Iron Bear said. Yes, Father. You bring shame on family name. Ayana's chin trembled, but she didn't look away. Yes, Father. But you also speak truth about Stone Wolf. Yes, Father. Iron Bear reached down and touched his daughter's face gently. I should have listened better. Tears started running down Ayana's cheeks. Sorry I run, Father. But I cannot marry him. Cannot live with man who kill babies. I know. Iron Bear said softly. I know. Samuel stood there watching, feeling like an intruder but afraid to move. This was the moment everything would be decided, and he had no control over it at all. Iron Bear straightened up in his saddle and looked at Samuel again. You show kindness to my daughter when you could have shown cruelty. You speak truth when you could have lied. You risk your life for stranger. Samuel didn't know what to say to that, so he just nodded. Among my people, Iron Bear continued, such actions have meaning, have value. I just did what felt right, Samuel said. What feel right, not always what is easy, not always what is safe. The war chief paused, studying Samuel's face. You could have turned my daughter away. Send her back to Storm. Would have been safer for you. Yes, sir. But I couldn't live with myself if I'd done that. Iron Bear nodded slowly. This tell me what kind of man you are. The war chief looked around at his warriors, still positioned on the hills around Samuel's homestead. Then he looked back at Samuel and his daughter. I make decision, he said. Marriage to Stone Wolf is finished. I find other way to make alliance. Ayana gasped and nearly collapsed with relief. Samuel felt like he could breathe again for the first time in hours. But Iron Bear wasn't finished. You, Samuel Morrison, he said, using Samuel's full name for the first time. You show honor to daughter of Iron Bear. Now Iron Bear show honor to you. The war chief reached into a bundle tied to his saddle and pulled out something Samuel had never expected to see. It was a lance, decorated with feathers and beadwork, beautiful and obviously important. Iron Bear rode closer to Samuel's cabin and planted the lance firmly in the ground near the front door. The feathers fluttered in the breeze, and the beadwork caught the sunlight. "This is protection lance," Iron Bear explained. "Mark this place is under protection of Iron Bear and all who follow him. Any Comanche who see this lance know you are friend to our people." Samuel stared at the lance, hardly believing what he was seeing. "Sir, I don't know what to say." "Say nothing. Just remember that honor recognize honor, even between enemies." Iron Bear looked at his daughter one more time. "You come home. Now, Ayana, we talk more about your future. Find better way." Ayana nodded and walked over to Samuel. "Thank you," she said simply. "You saved my life in more ways than one." Samuel smiled at her. "You take care of yourself, you hear? And remember what we talked about. Sometimes the right thing is worth fighting for." She hugged him quickly, like a daughter might hug her father, then walked back to Iron Bear's horse. The war chief reached down and pulled her up behind him. "Samuel Morrison," Iron Bear said one last time, "you are welcome in Comanche territory. This I promise." With that, he turned his horse and rode away, his daughter holding tight to his waist. Samuel watched them go, still hardly believing he was alive to see it. One by one, the other warriors faded away from the hills around his homestead, disappearing like ghosts into the landscape. Soon Samuel was alone again with just his animals and the wind blowing across the plains. But he wasn't really alone. The lance stood guard by his door, a reminder that sometimes, when you do the right thing for the right reasons, the world finds a way to reward you. And sometimes, honor really can exist between enemies. Samuel walked over to the lance and touched one of the feathers gently. Tomorrow, he'd have to figure out what came next. But today, he was alive, and a young woman was free from a terrible fate. Sometimes that was enough.